Hello, I'm Bill Hampton from the AutoBeat Group, and with me today is Jack Pokrzywa from SAE. He's the Director of Global Ground Vehicle Standards there. Thanks for joining us, Jack.
Hi, Bill.
Now, global standards about vehicles. Let's talk about connected vehicles, meaning vehicles that talk to each other. Certainly about the time that starts to happen, there has to be some rules about how the conversation goes on and who does what with the information. That sounds like that's where you step in.
Well, we live in a very interesting phase of automobile industry development. The car is not a standalone object anymore. It's a moving object, and now it's connected. It's connected to other vehicles. It's connected to infrastructure. It's communicating with electrical grid. All of that things combined make it an associated vehicle that moves around freely under some guidelines. But those guidelines, I have to tell you, are still under development. We're learning quite a bit about what can or cannot be done. We're waiting also for the government to set certain regulations in place, or at least propose that they will regulate the space of connected vehicles.
Is that how it starts? I mean, it's the government's move now to make some sort of standards upon which you build this structure?
Well, we're waiting for NHTSA to actually make a decision whether the connected vehicle space will be regulated in the future or not. And this should come towards the end of this year, so we're about there right now.
And that would open the door to some regulatory, not regulatory, but standards?
Standards are actually in development as we speak. We do have some agreements and contracts with federal government to move development of those standards forward. But the rules, the government rules, the regulations are not yet set in place. So as they move with regulations forward, the standards will be meeting them at some point.
Now, you talk to people in the business about autonomous cars, and many of them say, well, technologically speaking, we're there now. The hardware is available. The question is, how do you integrate all of it? And that's, again, where the standards come in. So that's going to ultimately drive this, isn't it? The pace of acceptance and implementation?
Yes, it's a very interesting time, in fact, because usually we have a certain setting that is being developed and then we follow with standards. And it seems that right now we have already state of Nevada, a state of Florida, and state of California that allows autonomous vehicles to be on the road for testing purposes only. And yet we don't have many standards, if at all. So we have to catch up with that. We have to start looking at engineering principles to see what is really viable, feasible, practical, and safe, specifically safe, because that's the big concern of everyone. Well,
and as you say, a handful of states now are allowing autonomous cars under very strict circumstances to drive around, but that's a very small pool. If you start to think of thousands or millions of cars all talking to each other, that's an awful lot of information that's being exchanged very rapidly and sometimes in a safety-related way. So there has to be a very rigorous way to control all this and supervise it, doesn't there?
Well, absolutely, and it's going to go, the whole implementation or deployment will go through certain phases. So increasingly we'll see more and more functions within the vehicle that are automated. And eventually, and it's going to take a long time, eventually we will probably get to a point where we will program the car, we'll get into it and start reading a book. But people should remember that to get to that point, we still have a lot of time. We need that time to develop certain specs, certain rules, and certain principles that we can then live with.
Well, how much time are we talking about? How would you see this playing out?
Well, I don't know if I would be here with you if I knew that. But just realistically, it will be decades. How many? I don't know. 1, 2. We don't know at this point. The technology is advancing so rapidly, as you can see here at the show today, that it's really hard to predict. I mean, 7-10 years ago, we were talking about electric vehicles, for example, as kind of a science fiction, and yet we do have now production vehicles on the roads. So it may change, and it may get accelerated or slowed down depending on how fast the technology is developing.
So it's going to take a little while.
Absolutely.
Jack, thank you for joining us today.
Thank you, Bill.
I'm Bill Hampton.